Yeah, right.
If it costs that much one more time or two times or whatever, like for instance, it costs you $45,000 to house an inmate for 1 year. It costs you $35,000 to educate that inmate so they have a job when they get out. You're going to save yourself a lot of money in the long run.
A lot of money, right?
Yeah.
All right, as you sign in, let me see who you are.
Yeah. Most of them don't have anything to go into, and they're institutionalized. And as you were saying, some of the prisoners that are there, that's what they know and that's what they want.
Yep, exactly.
That's all they understand.
Exactly. All right, who's on here? Let me see who's going on. Some of you I know were just in the corrections class. I just want you to know, hey Sharon, thanks for coming back. I appreciate it. Some of you, don't get confused. The core today is the theory. It doesn't matter what the example is. I know that this is narcotics in society, and which is different than corrections. But hey, let's put it this way: they're interconnected, aren't they? I mean, what drove our prison boom in the 1970s and 1980s was what? The way in which we processed, drugs, the way in which we defined them. So anyhow, whew, I'm hot, man. I'm tired. But Sharon, you were there for a minute, weren't you? How was it? Did you enjoy it? The corrections class? Hello again. Hey, Richie. Bijou, what's happening? Oh, brother. Your papers were pretty good. They haven't been graded yet, but I did thumb through some of them. I appreciate the efforts that you're putting forth. And I think that next week, actually, we're going to be doing a video. Hey, Sharon. Okay, all right, that's cool. I just asked because I didn't want you to walk away confused, that's all. I just didn't want you to walk away confused because there's nothing like being confused when you're coming to this class, but then you see information from the other one. It doesn't matter. The information's essentially, theoretically, the information's the same, so it's all good either way. But let me just say as an announcement real quick that, as you know, I'm having all kinds of logistical issues pulling together the assignments for the different classes. Some of them are being submitted in Blackboard, some are being sent to my work email, some are being sent to Sean at HopeWorks, all that kind of stuff, which is fine. But it's really hard to tease it out, especially when someone doesn't give me what the title is. Hey, Ronaldo, what's going on? Man, it seems like I haven't seen you all in about 3 months. I hope everything is going well. Let me see by a show of hands. Here's what I was going to say, and then I'll come back to it. Next week, you were to have a paper, a movie analysis. Let me go back and check my notes. I think you had a movie analysis that was supposed to be written up for next week. Here's what I'm doing instead, okay? I'm going to give you a couple of movies to choose from. I'm going to give you Cocaine Cowboys. You know, Sharon, this is what drives me crazy about technology. I'll run my head around and around and around only to find out that it doesn't work with, what's this thing from Microsoft, Edge, or it doesn't work with Chrome, or it doesn't work with Firefox. You have to find, I never think about which browser type, you know what I mean? I don't know. It drives me crazy. It really does drive me crazy. Don't worry. Don't worry about it. If you've done all the homework, you're good. I'll get it all together. Don't worry. That's the least of my concerns. But because I'm behind and you all are a little bit worried, let me do this. There's a movie for next week. I'm just going to have you watch the movie. All right. Don't worry about doing the analysis. I'm going to choose. Well, you're going to choose. I'm going to put Cocaine Cowboys on there. The reason I like Cocaine Cowboys in particular is not because I'm particularly in love with the Cocaine Cowboys, but because since our school is in Miami and since the movie is based upon Miami, I think it's fascinating to see how that beautiful downtown skyline was built with drug money. Right. On the one hand, Miami is the most remarkable tourist place. I mean, I love Miami. I don't know about you. I love the people. I love the city. I love the nightlife. I love the day life. I only go to Miami Beach when I want a vacation. I don't even go over there. But when I do, I go over there as a vacation. And here's what's interesting about Miami Beach, correct? The Colony Hotel and all those hotels up and down Ocean Drive, they're all based upon cocaine, correct? Not the cocaine industry, but based upon Miami Vice, the TV show that was filmed on Miami Beach. What they did is back in the 1980s, to mid-1980s, mid to late 1980s, is when they would film, they would renovate an entire hotel, and then they'd film it, And over time, because it was such a popular show back in the 1980s, that Miami Vice actually was the root of renovating Miami Beach. So now we have this great tourist place. Even though the drug money built Brickell and the drug money built downtown, it ends up that the drug money gave an image to Hollywood to go ahead and produce TV shows up and down Ocean Drive, and that's why you have the beauty of Miami Beach. That's why I'm fascinated by the show, right? And when I first arrived, when you watch Cocaine Cowboys, one of the things that you're going to see is you're going to see how organized it was. All right, in Lethal Violence was there's three types of homicide. There's instrumental homicide. There is ritualistic homicide, and then there's instrumental, ritualistic. I wasn't thinking about this right offhand. Ritualistic and instrumental, ritual. There's a third one. All right, but instrumental basically is where the homicide, expressive, I knew I'd think of it. Instrumental homicide is where it has like a business purpose. Okay, it's not done just for the purpose of killing somebody. Instrumental homicide is it has a purpose behind it, and typically it's a business purpose. Hey, good afternoon, Jonathan. I saw you before. Expressive homicide is just as it sounds. It's an emotional outburst. It's an emotional outburst in which two parties, generally in an argument, one explodes into lethality and the other person dies by virtue of the nature of the argument. It's expressive, right? Then the third type is ritualistic. And Colombia is famous for the ritualistic homicides. For example, the Colombian necktie, right? Where they kill you and then they take your tongue and they hammer it up against to a telephone pole and they hang you by your tongue. Or they slit, that's what they do. They slit your throat, pull the tongue out, hang it up on a telephone pole as an example of don't cross this group. And so when Cocaine Cowboys was taking place, you had a whole lot of instrumental homicide and a little bit of expressive, or not expressive, a little bit of ritualistic because of the nature of the cocaine drive. If you took those out and you took a look at the expressive form of homicide, that was pretty much stable at the point in the 1980s. So, when we take a look at homicide in Miami, Miami's a very complicated place because it really did have in the 80s 3 types of homicides being wrapped up into one. And it was all tied to the drug industry, right? Which is really fascinating anyhow, because, if you break that movie down, which I think is phenomenal, is, it's so complex. They make it look really simple, but you have to tease it out. When you watch it, one of the things I want you to do, one of the specific things I want you to do is take notes. Hey, Paul. Take notes on the statistics that they give out between 1979 through 1985. And then take notes on, because they're going to give you general homicides that take place in Miami during those periods of time. But then what's fascinating is, the movie, some of you have seen it, some of you have not, but Griselda Blanco becomes like the central feature in the discussion of the Cocaine Cowboys. And what I want you to do is separately document how many homicides were in relationship to her. And then her guy, what was her guy's name? The hitman that worked for her. It was, I want to say Manny, but it wasn't Manny. It was, I can't remember the name right offhand. Take a look at how many people he killed, even though he was her #1 hitman. And what you're going to see is some of this movie, most of it, is really done to dramatize the event. And it's really a distortion. But on the other hand, really what you're going to see, okay, you're going to see a fissure, but you're not going to acknowledge it because they didn't produce it this way. You're going to see this fissure between organized instrumental type of homicide, that is the ones that had a very specific purpose, and you're going to see about a third of them were the Griselda Blanco types, maybe a fifth. The others ended up, they were just individuals trying to carve their way out. So most of the homicides were driven by the fact that people were trying to establish territory, and in doing so, you had a lot more individuals battling individuals to establish territories, whereas the others, like Griselda Blanco and them, operated out of an organized model, much like organized crime. So you really had 2, 3, 4 different types of underlying criminal crime features in Miami during the 1980s and early 1990s, more so than what the movie portrays. But what I want you to do is, while you watch it, just take a look at the way in which it's portrayed. And it's a fantastic movie. I mean, it's really good. I'll put a link in there. If you can't find it for free, I think it's like $2.99 or something like that, or $3.99. I'll provide the link. And then the other movie that I'll be glad for you to watch, I can't. Someone help me with the title. Someone help me with the title on this. It's the one with Penelope Cruz. Is it called Flow? What is it called? What's the one with Penelope Cruz? The movie on drugs. It's also based in Miami. Blow. That's it. Hold on a second. I knew I'd think of it. This rusty brain, it'll think of most things at some point. Blow. There we go. So what I'm going to do is you will have the chance to watch one or the other. But I'm not going to have you do the write-up, okay? Not for this time. What I'll do instead is I'm going to put the movie write-up, I'm just going to incorporate that into the exam. Because the exam is going to be, it's not multiple choice, forget about it. I mean, with this remote learning, it'd be almost impossible to do a remote exam given the nature of live streams, given the nature of the textbook and stuff like that. So instead what I'll do, and I do this anyhow, is I'm going to make sure that the exam stays as an essay exam. And what I'll do is I'll just blend into it the assignment. Now, please, do not get on WhatsApp and start discussing this, because what's going to happen is if you get on WhatsApp and start discussing this, everyone's going to be confused. Let me take care of it. Oh my gosh, please do not put it on WhatsApp. Let me take care of this, all right? All you're doing next week is watching a movie. That's all you're doing. Let me take care of the rest, okay? Oh, please, don't make my head explode. Oh, on a side note, completely on the side, at 7:30 tonight, which is, what, an hour and 10 minutes, I'm doing the second installment of an investment seminar at 7:30, because I think that we are woefully inadequate in how we're training students to prepare for their financial lives in the future. And if I have anything to do with it, I'll try to provide you with information. The Zoom link is in last week's announcement, so you can go back into Blackboard and you can find that, but it's definitely there. All right. So are there any questions with what we're going to be doing with the movie? And I'll put the links in. The links that I'm putting in have a cost to them. They're not. I didn't check out Blow, but I know Cocaine Cowboys isn't so expensive. But if you can find it for free, by all means, just watch one or the other or both for free. They will show up on your exam, and that's just fine. At this point, before I get into our discussion this evening, do you have any questions that I can answer about anything? Because I'm here, I'll be glad to answer those at this point in time. Oh, while you're thinking of questions, okay, I'm going to give you a series of, take notes, I'm going to give you a series of theories that I want you to look up on your own time. The first one is functionalism. That's with Durkheim. All right, take notes. I know you can go back and watch this. The next one is called strain theory, or anomie. Okay, and that is with Merton. So you look these up. Then there's social control, and that is with Travis Hershey, which is right out of here, University of Arizona in Tucson, which is where I am currently. And then we have differential association theory. Now, all these theories that I just laid out for you all come from underneath the umbrella of functionalism. So when you're doing your research on them, and we're going to talk about what functionalism is, when you're doing your research, look at how they're linked to the originator, which is functionalism. Sutherland is the author for differential association theory. The next genre I want you to look up is conflict theory, which is Karl Marx. And then there is alienation theory, which is also Marx, but there's a bunch of other ones as well. Then there's internal colonization theory, which is yours truly. And then there's labeling theory, which there's a bunch of them, but start off with Becker. So you're going to be looking these theorists up. Now, the ones I like the most, that I find to be the most fascinating, but probably the most complicated to understand. It's so funny that, you know, when we communicate with one another and we interact, it seems so very natural and so very simple. But when you start to take into account the theoretical positions that make sense of our interactions and the theoretical positions that explain how context and definition of situations emerge based upon our social constructions, when you start getting into that kind of stuff, the fact that you don't have an identity or a self until it's constructed for you, and that stuff, man, that stuff starts blowing your head up a little bit. But that's really what I like. So we take a look at symbolic interactionism, which is George Herbert Mead. All right, and then you're going to take a look at the one I love the most. Oh my gosh, I love this one. I love this one. It's called Dramaturgy with Goffman. I love it because basically what Goffman is arguing is nothing exists, right? Because everything is based upon presentation of self. And in that presentation of self, we're constantly acting out the role that we occupy. So if you go back to that Who Am I video that I asked you to watch way back in the first week or second week, and you go back to it, you're going to see that the way in which we present ourselves always occurs on a stage. So it doesn't matter who we're interacting with, we're always an actor in a theater, on a stage, right? So when you're with people who you know and you're really comfortable with, you act in the backstage. And in the backstage, that's where people get to see who you really are. That's where they get to hear you say foul language. That's where they get to hear your petty jokes. That's where they get to hear all that stuff about your worries, your concerns, your hopes, your dreams. All those kind of things happens on the backstage. When you're on the front stage, which is in the formal domain, you're a lot more proper. You know, you're not trying to get fired, so you try to be, you know, you try to be collected. You try to be communicative and cooperative, and that's because you're on the front stage. And then what he says, I just love this stuff, is that everything, we always wear a mask, right? And the mask we wear is to protect our authentic self. So we present this virtual self so that other people can't attack us. And we put out, he says, we give and we give off. What we give is what we're trying to conscientiously shape others' interpretation of us. What we give off through our body language is what they actually understand. So there's always a discrepancy between what we give and what we give off. Think about your relationships for just a second. If you think about your dating relationships, or if you're married, your marital relationships, how many times has it happened that you try to give something, you say something that's completely misinterpreted, right? Or you give a gift and it's misinterpreted. Or you sigh or something like that because you're thinking, but then it's regarded as being rude. In other words, we give 13% of it in language. 13% of all our communication is through verbiage. 87% is given off by our body language. So oftentimes our body language doesn't match our words, and therefore we have this discrepancy. And then Goffman also says that we can never fully be honest because we never have a concept that perfectly matches the way in which we see the world. Right? But anyhow, that's dramaturgy. Here's another one of my favorites. Phenomenology, which is also him, but it's also Garfinkel. No, this is actually Alfred Schutz. All right, and then we have ethno, which I love. I love all these micro theories. Methodology, ethnomethodology, which is Garfinkel. Okay, Harold Garfinkel. Basically, what Harold Garfinkel says is we engage in what are called status degradation ceremonies. Status degradation ceremonies. In other words, when somebody engages in deviant behavior, we humiliate them, right? And what we do is we degrade their status so that we can identify them as being troublemakers, right? When we pick on someone in the playground, the bullies are denigrating that person. They're degrading them through ceremonial behavior. When you get arrested and you go to jail, what do? They strip you of all your identity. They throw you in an orange suit and they give you a number. They don't even call you by name. They call you by your number. So you become stripped away from your identity and you become made to be degraded so that you can be like all the other degenerates, which is how that system works, right? So what we do with status degradation ceremonies is that we try to degrade you as much as possible so that we can gain control. And in gaining control, we can maintain stability within that prison system, right? So that is ethnomethodology. By the way, that's how hate works too, right? Because hate, if you think about it, it is a status degradation ceremony. It is a way of debasing your opponent. And it doesn't matter to me which side you took in the debate the other night, but what you were watching with Biden and Trump, probably more Trump, I mean, let's be realistic about it. What you're really watching was a degradation ceremony. The more you can degrade your opponent, the less human they are. And the less human they are, the more weakness they appear to have. And therefore, if they appear weak, then you appear strong, then you become more vote worthy. That's what you were watching, right? According to Garfinkel, you were watching a status degradation ceremony, even though it was one-on-one. Now, if it was done in mass, which is what happens with vigilante justice, right, where we attack one group of people, right, then what happens is that we're exploring these boundaries and acting as if they're real. Because with ethnomethodology, what we do is we learn to define the categories of people as inherently different. And then when we go through degradation ceremonies, not only are they different, they're not worthy of our respect. The next step is, once you're not worthy of respect, then you dehumanize. Once you dehumanize, you create a system of hatred. And once you have hatred that is based upon the dehumanization process, it is much easier to extract punishment, even lethal punishment, from that group of people. I mean, that's what war is, correct? War is this idea that we create a category of people, the threat, then we define them as a threat, then they act as a threat. It fulfills the prophecy, and then once they fulfill the threat, then they're less human, okay? Because now their status is less, and then if we can apply hate to their status, then it's easier to kill an inanimate object than it is a human being. By the way, that's how it works with domestic violence. You know, because when we take a look at homicide and the distribution of homicide, and I know this is narcotics, but I'm just hitting you up with a little theory for a second, right? When we take a look at homicide, right, and you take out unknowns, where we don't know the victim-offender relationship, just take them out for a second. The number one category of homicide is friends killing friends, right? And, you know, that's not pertinent to this class, but that is the number one category. Once we take out unknowns, even if it was known, it's probably going to be a substantial proportion of people who know each other. Once you take out friends, the number one category is husbands killing wives. That's it, right? Husbands killing wives is the number one category within, like, family situations. Take out friends, in the family, husbands killing wives. Now, how does that happen? How does it happen that somebody who once loved somebody, how do you go from love to the point where their life can be wiped away with a stroke of anger? Well, here's how it works, right? It's a textbook definition of domestic violence. It starts really simple. I love you, baby. Oh, I love you. And you have all these accolades and flowers and meals and all these kind of things. Then, and it often happens with people who went through childhood trauma, who are actually victimized themselves, and they've learned these definitions, these scripts, as Goffman would call them. They learn the scripts for violence, or the need for control, and then they start to define, why are you going to wear that? Who are you going to hang out with? That's not really smart. That's not smart. You're dumb. And next thing you know, well, you spend way too much. Why am I going to give you more money to go spend? So you say, why are you wearing that? You can't wear that. Then why are you going out with them? You can't go out with them. You're spending too much money, and I'm going to hold that money. I'm going to humiliate you here. And what happens is that the person becomes, their social world becomes smaller, 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 and the control becomes greater, 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 greater. Now, when there's financial and economic strain placed upon that particular couple, the man will typically define her as the reason why he is failing, especially in the public domain. So if he's failing in the public domain and he defines her as the object that has been the obstacle to him being fully human, then it's easier to direct his hate in her direction and therefore isolate her from her friends. And through that process of isolation, once she becomes hated enough, he becomes the object of his physical aggression. And eventually, what we see and it happens. I mean, just take a look at how domestic homicide happens. Over time, it becomes distant, 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 the hate, the rage, the hypermasculinity, and the next thing you know, by the way, typically when a female is killed by the husband, there's been 4 visitations, back at least in the 90s and early 2000s, there were 4 visitations by police. Now, some of that's changed, but nonetheless, the process is still there, right? And by the fifth time they come, it's for a homicide. But anyhow, that really is ethnomethodology. I'm just letting you know that these theories work, okay? Now, some theories work in some situations, others do not. Because what is a theory designed to do? A theory is designed to do basically three things. Three things, all right? Not 23. Come on, baby. Three things. One, it helps us to explain events. Two, it helps us understand patterns of behavior, right? And then three, it helps us predict. So if that's true, then this is really invaluable for the understanding of drug abuse, drug distribution, and narcotics in society. Because our interpretation of drugs is definitely going to be derived by the theories that we have. Now here's some other theories that I want you to look up, all right? Stream analysis, not string. String is some Einsteinian stuff. Stream analysis, which again is Schwaner, that's me, thank you very much. And it's also Huff, Corzine. I just love stream analysis personally. Then you're looking at career criminal research, which is a focus on chronicity, and chronic offenders. All right, you're gonna look all these up for yourself. Age, crime curve. Then we're going to look up maturational reform. And then the last one I want you to look up is routine activities theory. Alright, so we're going to look those up. And the reason you're going to look them up is because you're going to see them in the exam. I'm only going to really talk about the big three, which is functionalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionism. I expect for you to look them up. But what I did when I listed them for you, I listed them according to their grand theory. So the ones under functionalism, those are functional type of theories. Labeling, internal colonization, those are conflict theories. Symbolic interaction, dramaturgy, phenomenology, ethnomethodology, those are all symbolic interaction type of theories. All right, so basically we can categorize theories by type and what family they belong to. And the family determines our interpretation. So functionalist theories are going to have very similar interpretations as one another. Conflict theories are going to be rooted in the same kind of interpretation, and it's going to be the same with symbolic interaction theories. And of course, the career criminal research is going to have similar types of outcomes. So anyhow, those are some of the overviews that you have. But I will begin with this. I'll begin with this, much like I did in corrections for those of you who came in. The issue of drugs in society may be perhaps the most complicated freaking issue that we have, bar none, right? Because when we take a look at American society, and a lot of you came up with this in that first assignment, what is the difference in who am I between me and a drug offender, and me and a drug abuser, and me and a drug dealer, right? It's very difficult to say, because when you take a look at the history of drugs in America, I mean, it's a history where the whole society was built on drugs. I mean, there's no two ways about it. But the question that we have to ask is that when we're talking about drugs, what are we talking about, right? Because typically when we're talking about drugs, we're talking about the ones that cause harm, right? The ones that cause harm. The ones that undermine society. That's what we typically talk about. But it's a distortion, right? It's a large distortion. Because the drugs that we have made illegal are oftentimes not the ones that do the most harm. Because if you really take a look at the ones that do the most harm, you know, you're really talking about alcohol and you're talking about cigarettes, you know, just regular everyday cigarettes. And we know that alcohol is linked to all kinds of, you know, deviant behavior, whether it's suicidal ideation. You know, if we take a look at homicide again, 1/2 of all homicides occur where both the victim and the offender were intoxicated. So we talk about, you know, when we talk about gun control, we talk about, removing them all from the streets, or we talk about we should all have the right to have them. But really, I don't even know if that's the question. And when we're talking about lethal violence, because it's always lethal violence in which it comes up, right? And what we do is we take these mass murders, and that's where all these debates come from. Because here's what we do. We take a look at mass murder. Because when a mass murderer walks into a school, or they walk into a hotel and they gun down 300, 400, 500 people and they kill 56 or whatever the number is, first thing we start to do is we say, what's in their mind, baby? What is the thing that's in their mind? Because we are so psychologically, theoretically oriented when it comes to crime and justice that we always want to focus on what happened here. You're from Miami. When I first got hired here in 2012 and I was coming down, my wife at the time, she said, you can't go to Miami, it's dangerous down there. I said, Miami's no more dangerous than any place else. It's all based upon location. And of course, what happens? It's not funny. The day before I'm supposed to come down, or the week before, there's the cannibal on the causeway. Remember that dude on MacArthur Causeway? That he's coming from Miami Beach, and he takes off all his clothes as he's approaching the Miami Herald. And there's a homeless guy that's sitting underneath the bridge, the Metro mover, and he's laying down there. And then all of a sudden, this naked dude starts to, he gouged out the guy's eyes and starts eating his face and chewing it and spitting it out. And and the police come. And actually, I had a police officer who was in my class who was the initial shooter. And the police officer came and he shot him in the back, the perpetrator. And he looked up at the police officer. You didn't get this on the news. He looked up at the police officer and he roared at the police officer. And then they shot him 5 more times in the back and they killed him, right? And you have this picture where the guy who was the victim, his name was Papo. He was a homeless guy. He went to the hospital and they had to do all kinds of reconstructive surgery. And what looked like an apparent strange-related homicide wasn't a strange-related. It wasn't a homicide. A strange-related attack wasn't a strange-related. They knew each other, but we didn't know exactly why the cannibal attacked this guy. It was never clear. But the argument is that he was on bath salts. And so all of a sudden, so now we're looking at this as a drug case, and all the toxicology reports came back that this person had no drugs in his system. There was a slight trace of marijuana, I think, was in his system, but they couldn't find anything else in the system. And so I think that when we look at that case, if we look at it in hindsight, I think most people were hoping and praying that he was on drugs, some kind of hallucinogenic drug or something that would induce this kind of violence. Because think about it. If this guy, I can't remember his name, and by the way, I had a student who actually knew him in high school because he played football. He was rather popular in his class, and this woman was saying, yeah, he was a super nice guy. She couldn't believe that this was the person that attacked this man on the causeway. And so we're looking at it and we're like, gosh, it had to be bath salts, had to be Flocka or something. It had to be some kind of drug. I don't think Flocka was right in the main yet, but we said it has to be something like that. It has to be. Because if it isn't, then we got a major problem, right? If we can't explain such heinous and gross behavior by looking at this from a psychological perspective or a drug perspective, then we have to say, who can we trust? Because if this is a normal everyday guy just walking across the bridge and then all of a sudden he decides he's going to strip down naked, then he's going to eat somebody, right? What does that mean about us in everyday life? Who are we threatened by? We want it to be either some kind of psychological dementia or we want it to be drug induced. Because at least that way we can understand it. But if it's not that, then we have no kind of a former strategy of analyzing this behavior from any other perspective, right? Because if this person is quote-unquote normal and does this, that makes everybody a bigger threat to our lives than if it is a drug-induced state. Because a drug-induced state we can understand, but a normal everyday person we don't get that. Well, incidentally, and you probably don't know this, here's what happened. It was like 2 days later, maybe the next day, in New Jersey. There were 2 students, I don't remember the college, Rutgers or something like that. I don't know if it was Rutgers. It may not have been Rutgers. But it was up in New Jersey. One man ate his roommate, which is grotesque, it's heinous, and I believe it was for religious reasons. And it didn't receive the same amount of attention because the Popo case was videotaped, and it was gross. You could actually watch it take place, and it was a horrific rendering. And actually, I was teaching at Sullivan University, and one of my students had received the pictures from the crime scene within 20, 30 minutes. So someone had leaked it out, and it was horrible. But then I've made the argument. I said, see, Gretchen, there's also the threat in New Jersey. You can't predict this kind of thing. There's no more reason for it to happen in Miami than New Jersey. So I went ahead and I made my move to Miami. But the issue is the same, is that where do drugs play their role, right? Which drugs do we focus on and why? Why is it we have certain types of drug laws and certain types of drugs are not illegal? If you take a look at society, American society was built on drugs, right? When they were smoking the peace pipe on Thanksgiving, what was in that peace pipe? What do you think was in there, right? And during the 1700s, when we had the revolutionary ideas to stand up to the British and become independent, the water was contaminated in Philadelphia. So most grown-ups, what they had to drink was distilled liquors. They were drinking alcohol because it was the only way to purify and clean the water up. So alcohol was very normative during the colonial period simply because we didn't have the technology to clean the water. I mean, think about it. I lived in Philadelphia when I worked for the 76ers back in 1987. And I lived in this building called the Castings, which was a fantastic place. It was brand new. It used to be a factory, and they renovated the factory. And the back door to the, like you can see my hands, the back door was connected to Betsy Ross's house, who she didn't theoretically, she sewed the first American flag. Right across the street from where I lived on 3rd and Arch. So on 2nd Street, there was what is called Elfreth's Alley. Elfreth's Alley, I'll just write it out. It's not really pertinent, but Elfreth's Alley is regarded as the first known American neighborhood, right? Elfreth's Alley. And that's where Benjamin Franklin lived. So when I came out of my apartment, I could see Benjamin Franklin's house. And the streets in Philadelphia, if you've ever been there, are very narrow. And they're narrow because they were built in, the 1600s, 1700s. But if you look at the streets, and the original cobblestone is still there, there's like these, shaped like this. It's like gutters down the middle of the street. So when you went to the bathroom, there was no plumbing. And what they had to do is dump it in the middle of the street, and that, excrement went into the water table. So because it's going into the water table, the only way to really clean it was to distill it. And so now all of a sudden you have spirits being something that is consumed on a normal basis. That's why dysentery and so many different diseases were so pronounced back in colonial period. It's also why longevity was so short, because we had disease and pestilence all through our cities. But in any case, alcohol was a very normative part of the culture. If you go around the world and you take a look at different cultures, drugs and alcohol are really a part of the rituals and a part of the forms of social solidarity that are used to keep communities together. In some societies and more traditional groups in northern Ecuador and throughout the region, in the Amazon rainforest, in those areas, some of those more tribal leaders, alcohol and hallucinogenics were really a part of the culture. As a matter of fact, the Jivaro, which were from northern Ecuador, not the Jivaro, they were the Yanomanos. Oh God, you don't know what that is. Yanomanos. The Yanomanos. The headhunters, as we'd call them, right? No, the Jivaro were the headhunters. The Yanomanos were just a very aggressive group of people, right? But they were aggressive over scarce resources. But the shamans of the Yanomanos, they believed as a group that those persons who had, illusions, those who were delusional, those who had schizophrenia, those who could see a world that you and I couldn't see, were regarded as the most intelligent in the tribe. So what they regarded as hallucinations was actually regarded as being closer to the spirits. So within that group, one of the things that they would do is they used the yucca plant and like the coca leaf, but they'd also drink like 2-3 gallons of alcohol per day, because the belief was the more you drank, the more you reduced the spirit through drugs, the closer you could be to, what was real. The dream world is real. What you and I see is not. So culturally, the way in which drugs are a part of a society is really culturally driven, and how we define what is appropriate from not appropriate is culturally driven. So when we take a look at drugs in the United States, we take a look at drugs in America, the question is, what are we really looking at? Are we really looking at drugs? Are we looking at a particular historical period of time in which we take those definitions and we apply them in specific and certain ways? Right? There's some people that believe everything should be illegal. Other people believe that nothing should be illegal. And we've had our experiments with with complete control of alcohol, for example, with prohibition. And what we saw was that people were still going to get their alcohol one way or another. So prohibition, or the Volstead Act, was completely, it was a complete failure. As a matter of fact, it gave rise to, organized crime had already existed, but it gave rise to that violence associated with organized crime in the 1930s. Were Italians inherently evil, or were they able to organize because of community structures coming back from Sicily and southern Italy, such that they had a community structure where they could actually create organizations that would be loyal to one another so that they can engage in that crime, bootlegging. So the question is that what was really happening is that you made it illegal, but people still wanted it. So if there's a demand, there's always going to be a supply. When you watch Cocaine Cowboys, right? Watch what happens in that. If you really want a movie, what is it called? Do your research on Mina, airport, and cocaine. Here you got this little small airport in the middle of Mina, Arkansas. And it is one of the central distribution spots for cocaine in the United States. Now, I'm not going to get into the gist of it, but I'll let you take a look at it yourself. Right? So we take a look at the cocaine distribution system in the 1980s, 1970s. In the 1970s, we weren't fearful of cocaine because cocaine was limited to those persons who were wealthy who used it typically recreationally on the weekend. So it wasn't like there was this great big cocaine scare in 1978 because dentists and attorneys and doctors were using it. And they used it for recreation. It destroyed some lives, but it wasn't leading to homicide. But the drug that we were concerned with at that time in the 1970s was heroin, right? And LSD and angel dust and things of that nature. But what's interesting about the heroin is that the heroin, right, which is an opioid, was disproportionately killing urban inner city African American men who happened to be poor. And those men in the 1970s, when they were caught, they were incarcerated. There's a high, about 1 to 3% of the population used it, but there was a high mortality rate for those who did, and also a very high incarceration rate for those who were addicted to it. Fast forward to the years 2015 through 2020, right? And when we take a look at 70,000 people, I think 75,000 people died last year from opioid overdose. And what's the argument now? The argument now is that we need to rehabilitate these persons because these persons are off track, they're disproportionately white, they're disproportionately upper middle class, and that they can be saved, quote unquote saved. All right? So what was the root of it? Prescription drugs. Prescription drugs led to really this dependence upon drugs in the general society. And when the pill mills in Miami and in South Florida were deeply restricted and they couldn't be distributed back up to Kentucky. Once that happened, now you see the rise of crystal meth in the Midwest because we grabbed control of the prescription drugs, but you already had an addicted population. So rather than asking what's the source of the pain that people use to turn to drugs, instead we focus on going ahead and attacking the source. But the problem is, once you have the demand to alter consciousness, people are going to find other ways. And now what do you have? You have this fentanyl issue. You have this heroin issue coming back around. And what happened? The cartels are a lot smarter than we give them credit for. See, we like to think of the cartels as these rogue groups of people. Fact of the matter is, they're business people. And what they did is, during their distribution of marijuana up to and through the United States, and when they were distributing some cocaine up through Panama, all the way up through Mexico, and the cartels were grabbing control, they also did the meth. But what was brilliant on their part is they had their distributors, the middleman and the street level, they started giving out free opioids, free heroin. And in giving out free, what they're really trying to do is what the capitalists do, is they're trying to expand their marketplace. And they did a great job at it. So the cartels start spreading free heroin into the American system, and now you start to see a different type of addiction. They start sending fentanyl out, and they do it free. And what happens is that people get it as an experiment, and obviously they become instantly addicted to it because of the psychopharmacological effects. Next thing you know, you have this addicted population who's willing to die over their addiction, which is really, in my opinion, is one of the most, oh, hey, Ashley, what's happening? It's one of the saddest things that, we've seen. But the question is still the same, right? How do we explain all this? How do we explain it? I'm always curious as to how does a person go from birth to being deeply addicted to a drug that will kill them, including alcohol and smoking cigarettes. And if it's true, like back in the 1980s, we had these little children called crack babies. And, we had women who disproportionately on welfare, minority, who were poor, urban, inner city, whose babies were addicted to crack on birth. And the news started saying, oh, these poor babies are going through withdrawals, and it was a horrible... And I'm not saying crack babies are, I'm not making light of it. But all this emphasis on the welfare queen, and you don't remember because you weren't around. These women were sucking off of welfare, and they were using their money to get cocaine, and they were producing these crack-addicted babies. That's an image, baby. That's an image. That's called a moral panic. That's called a label that is created by a media industry. Doesn't mean it didn't happen, it did happen. But in where we focus our attention, when we create a moral panic, when we create a drug craze, we also bring in the resources to attack that craze. But here was the major problem, and this is where our drug laws have historically been so whack. It's because we take these ideas within a vacuum that now the crack babies are going to be addicted and they're going to become criminal offenders later. But how often do we hear about alcohol fetal syndrome? Hey, what's up, Juan? What's up, Juan? Why aren't we talking about the prevalence of alcohol fetal syndrome? We'll talk about a crack baby, but not alcohol fetal syndrome. Why? Because when you do that, then you have to start talking about the group who has power in society. White females from the middle class who are drinking while they're pregnant. Now all of a sudden, there's a lot more alcohol-addicted fetuses than there are crack-addicted fetuses, but why does the news portray this one? What is the impact of portraying one over the other? Why did we allow cocaine to be distributed through the United States? You know what the turning point was? The turning point wasn't the drug. The crack was already disintegrating in urban areas, right? Because of the economics of it. Why and what was the impetus that drove us to the point where we went in full bore into Colombia? There's the death of Len Bias. You don't even know who Len Bias is. Len Bias was a basketball player. He was the second pick, drafted number 2 by the Celtics out of Maryland. You've all heard of Michael Jordan. Well, let me tell you a little story. Len Bias and Michael Jordan were equals. Len Bias was every bit as good as Michael Jordan. They used to battle in the ACC, and their battles were dead smack even. Some can say that Michael is the greatest ever, some can say LeBron, but the one who gets lost in the mix is Len Bias. This guy, man, was chiseled. He could hit from the outside, he could dunk it from the inside. When he dunked, man, he was dunking with viciousness. Oh my gosh, he made what's his name, old boy from Oklahoma City that got traded to Harden, who's now Westbrook. Man, the way Westbrook brings it in, man, Len Bias was doing all that crazy stuff. And then he got drafted second, man, and here's Len Bias. It's like, man, this guy, everyone was cellar. Everyone liked Len Bias because he had that personality. 2 nights after he gets drafted by the Celtics, he dies of a cocaine overdose. Dead! Here's a guy who is known as Mr. Addiction. I know, it's freezing for everybody. Juan, I appreciate it. It just froze for everyone, so don't worry. I'm going to post it back in your class, and even though it froze while we're live, it continues to record. But in any case, when Len Bias dies, now the media is like, cocaine is ravishing the United States. And then they start saying, crack cocaine is devastating the United States. Right? And then we say, what are we going to do about it? Well, the best thing to do about it, they said, was to go into, and then what they did is they brought the President Reagan down to Miami so they could see the devastation. Because paradise was lost. Oh my God, we got this. The problem's been there for 6 years, but Len Bias dies. Now all of a sudden, it's the icon of everything. So it comes on, oh my God, George Bush, Miami's getting destroyed. We got to do something about this. We got to attack the labs down in Colombia. Really? Okay, do that. And what you have is still an addicted population is going to figure out how to get it done. And as long as you have an addicted population that's going to get their drugs, what you do back in the other countries is almost irrelevant. As a matter of fact, that's what gave rise to Pablo Escobar as the #1 drug trafficker on planet Earth. Right? He got all of his power for the fact that those people who were displaced in Colombia were the very ones that he saved. He built their schools, he built their roads, he gave them soccer, he gave them passion, he gave them patriotism, he gave them heroism, and he gave them a life that was displaced when the Americans came down and destroyed all those labs. Right? So now all of a sudden the guy who's the bad guy is actually the good guy. He was the Robin Hood. And then we take a look at who's right and who's wrong. We're not even looking at the right question. And the reason is because of theory. It's all theoretically driven. Watch. Here's how it works. All right? Here's how it works. If you're a functionalist, right, and I want you to go back to the early part of the semester in that video, Who Am I? And take a look at that video that has this in it. These institutions here, economics, political, family, education, etc., religion, media, criminal justice, they all work together to create society. Opportunity structure emerges, networks emerge, small groups emerge, and then you interact within a context. All right? Get to know that diagram, that video. The functionalists make the argument that those institutions work together to promote solidarity in society, right? So that if people are properly integrated, their beliefs that is, into society, that is, if they have organic solidarity, then society's belief systems will run smoothly. If people are properly regulated into the division of labor, that is, if they have access to employment, you're going to have equilibrium. So if the beliefs and the jobs are functioning properly, people are going to live in balance. And homeostasis is what it's called. There's going to be stability in society. That's the functionalist, right? So as long as everything is working fine, then we're good. That's a functionalist perspective. But when there's breakdown in the institutions, according to Durkheim, I put the names up earlier, right? The Durkheim will adapt to promote stability. So if we got to throw a lot of people in prison, that's okay because we're trying to promote stability. If we got to go down and attack Colombia, we're trying to create stability back home. We're not taking a look at other things. We're just saying we're trying to promote stability. The criminal justice system, political system defines them as the problem. We got to fix it so that we can have stability in our society, right? Makes sense as a functionalist perspective. So all those Colombians and all the Cubans that are blasting each other in Miami, we got to take them and we got to put them in prison, right? Don't look at the job market, which is what's driving it, is economic access. No, take a look at the people who are causing the problem, remove them, promote stability in society. It's a functionalist position, right? Because functionalists believe that all the institutions promote and maintain a status quo. It's not right, it's not wrong, it just is. Done. The conflict perspective, on the other hand, with Karl Marx, conflict's perspective says basically those institutions, the same institutions, work together to promote the position of the wealthy at the disadvantage of those who are not wealthy. The haves versus the have-nots. The proletariats, or the bourgeoisie. Bourgeoisie. Something like that. Bourgeoisie. Spelled like that somehow. Bourgeoisie is that top 1%. They are called the capitalist class, right? Capitalist class are the ones who own and control information, the allocated resources, and industry, the allocated resources. If you control information and you control the economics, you can control society. So those who are in the top 1% who control the economic division of labor, and those who control the media, the criminal justice institution, and those who can control the way in which education is distributed, they do it in a way that favors the wealthy over the poor. So that when we focus on crime control, we're always focusing on the crimes that are committed by the poor. We're always focusing on the drugs that are used by the poor rather than the drugs that are used by those who are wealthy. That's why in the 1970s, African American men who were dying from opioids, who were dying from heroin, went to prison. Now when you have someone who's addicted to opioids, they get rehabilitation, and we say, oh, that's so sad. In other words, why is that? Because those white upper middle class males and females who are now opioid addicted, they're the ones that are from those who are of the power class. Those are the ones who represent the wealthy class. So if you put them in prison, you're undermining your own society. Conflict theory says that we focus on the poor at the advantage of the wealthy. And take a look at it, right? If you take a look at income distribution in the United States, ever since COVID happened, the poor have gotten poorer, middle class has gotten, by the way, according to Marx, 1% of the population are capitalist class, the other 99% work for them. Doesn't matter if you're upper management, doesn't matter what you are. If you're working for them, if you're selling your labor to them, then you are a proletariat. Everything else trickles up to the capitalists. And what's happened in the last 3 years, or last 30, 40 years? What's happened with COVID? Well, all these people, 40 million people lost their jobs, right? I guess another 800,000 today were reported as having lost jobs. This is way up there, right? We found that the average income of the billionaire has gone up during the coronavirus, while everybody else, the average income has gone down. The level of wealth has gone down. The strain has gone up for the workers. So what's happened? So I'm looking today, I'm inside the grocery store because I had to get something for something. I had to get water. And I see the cover of a magazine. What does the cover of the magazine says? That people are increasingly, because of this social distancing, are finding that there's mental health issues and they're turning to drugs. And what have we seen during this period after the coronavirus? Those who are of the working class are dying from the overdoses. Why? Because the money is funneling up to the wealthy. They're not having the same stress. They're allowed to do different things that you can't do. And in the meantime, while you're feeling social isolation, we see mental health associated with that, breakdown with depression and things like that. More drugs and alcohol are being used. Why? Because of the change in the system. Because now this group of people is feeling alienation. And with alienation, people get angry, people get upset, and they try to resolve it. And drugs, historically have been a methodology that has been used by people to take care of their pain. Right? You do it. Everyone on this board right now does it. You use caffeine. Maybe some of you don't, okay? But many of you drink Cuban coffee, baby. Give me a colada. Cortadito, come on. Cafe con leche. And I miss them because I'm over here in Arizona, but I'm going to get one tomorrow because I'm coming back to Miami for a week. I'm going to get myself a little Cuban coffee, but guess what? It gets me all charged up, baby. You should see me when I teach on coffee. It's a whole nother person. It's showtime then. Why? You know, I used to drink like 10 and 12 Mountain Dews a day. When I used to have to teach 5 and 10 classes, I'd drink it so I could have that energy and pop in there. And people say, you're killing yourself. I said, I don't care about that. I'm going to do it. And I did it, right? I was addicted. Brother, one day I forgot to drink caffeine. And Lisa Fortwangler was she was the secretarial assistant at the sociology department at the University of Louisville. And I'm sitting here saying, oh my God. I'm holding my head like this. Oh my God. My head hurts. And I'm about in tears. And she said, what's wrong? I said, I got a headache, Lisa. She said, I haven't seen you drink any Mountain Dew today. I said, I forgot. I was having freaking withdrawals, baby. I was having withdrawals as if I was on heroin. And I asked, why am I doing it? Because Many of us have found reasons to justify the use of drugs to transform our current consciousness, whether it's to eliminate pain, whether it's to hide, whether it's to get pumped up, whether it's to come down, whether it's at the end of the week, right? Oh, I've had a long week, man, I'm tired, baby, and let me go ahead and have a brew. Oh, let me go ahead and hit some Xanax bars. Give me some weed, right? Oh, I got to study for a test. Give me some Adderall, right? I need to do this. Boom, pop this pill in here. I got pain for this. I don't even have pain. I'm going to make sure I don't have pain. We are a drug-addicted society. Many are. But we have these different labels that fly around as to who's deviant and who isn't. And those designations, according to the conflict theorists, are based upon who's poor and who isn't. If you are working class or you're poor or you're a proletariat, we're going to focus on your addiction, not the addiction of the wealthy. Why? Because it maintains the position of the wealthy. The laws that are passed maintains the position of the wealthy. Are you serious? If we were so worried about cocaine and its impact on American society, there were people, go watch the Mena, Arkansas video that I portrayed up there. Go watch it. Who should have been the ones in prison? That's a question you got to ask. Well, conflict theorists say the ones who went to prison were the poor, who were easier to target. Not the ones who were owning and controlling the distribution system who are wealthy. It's the other way around, right? Bam. By the way, the laws that get written, the choices that we make as to what's going to be legal or illegal, it's all symbolically constructed, symbolic interactionism. We socially construct definitions of what's appropriate from inappropriate. That's what we do. And in doing so, right, some groups get targeted as the threat. The first drug laws that were passed in the United States, they were passed to control the Chinese, right? Because the coolies, as they were called, were the threat to the whites who were building the railroads, the town owners who were building railroads. The coolies were the Chinese who built the railroads, right? And then you had people from India. Well, the coolies who came to the United States came as an addicted population. They were addicted to opium. Who were they getting the opium from? The Boer War in China in the mid-1800s was fought between Britain and the United States against China. China was telling Britain and the United States, quit selling opium to our rural population. And we went to war to continue to distribute the drugs into the hinterland. Even though the Chinese government said, don't do it, we don't want it. So they went to war. And of course, the West prevailed. And we addicted the population. For what? For profits. By whom? Property landowners. And then what happened? Those same persons that we addicted came to the United States to work on the railroads. And when they came to work on the railroads, do you think you can shake the addiction? No. Did we allow women to come with them? No. All we could do is have men who are young come to the United States who are addicted to opium. And what do you do when you're a young man between the ages of 16 and 25? You think their hormones weren't raging? Where do you think prostitution emerged from out there? Right? So you have these Chinatowns where there's prostitution, there's gambling, there's opium. Now all of a sudden the group is looked at as a group of disrepute. It wasn't their disrepute. It was the fact that they weren't allowed to bring women, wives and girlfriends here. They were only allowed to come here to work. And they were already addicted because of the British and the United States distributing drugs. Right? But then when we saw their drug addiction as a threat to society, then we passed laws saying that we couldn't have the yellow peril. We couldn't have these persons migrating here. We couldn't have these persons addicting our native population. Therefore, they must be controlled. And symbolically, we define them as the deviant. Symbolically, we said that they are the scourge of the West. Symbolically, they were everything evil. And if you go back and look at the caricatures, the actual cartoons that were drawn, every single person who was Chinese looked evil. All right? That's symbolic. That's symbolic interactionism. So that the laws that were constructed to control drugs at the time were constructed to control that population. Not to make society better. There's an act of social control. And if you look at all the drug laws that have been passed since then, you'll see that all of them were passed by those who had power and they controlled those who didn't. That's conflict theory mixed with symbolic interactionism. Anyhow, when we take a look at narcotics, we take a look at drug addiction, when we take a look at drug laws, when we take a look at drug distribution, just keep in mind, look up those theories that I gave you. because it's a lot more complicated than anybody ever tells us when we're talking about drugs, drug addiction, drug distribution, and things like that. You got to have these theories in your head, right? And I gave them to you. They're all up here in the chat. Take a look at them. Look them up on your own. Again, I'm going to reiterate, I'm not going to have you do a movie analysis per se because I'm behind in grading. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 2 links into the feed. One is for the Cocaine Cowboys. The other one is for Blow with Penelope Cruz. And you can watch either one or both. The links I put in are links that you can purchase, but if you can find them for free, that's fine. So it doesn't matter to me, just as long as you watch it, and it's going to come back around on the exam. Do not, please do not get on WhatsApp and start talking about what I just said. Let me handle it. Let these students who are not on here today watch the video, because I just put it in the video at the beginning and the end. Do not get on WhatsApp and confuse them. Okay? I will make the announcement. I did make the announcement. Did I? Or was that the other class? I'll make the announcement in the announcement board as it was taking place. I don't want the confusion. I don't want my phone blowing up. I don't want a bunch of 9,000 emails. Oh my God, I'm confused. I don't know what happened. It's going to make me turn to drugs, baby. So, based upon all that, you will watch the movie next week. Then we'll come back and we'll do one of these things again, a live stream, which are not mandatory, right? But I'm glad you're here because it helps me with like the interaction and stuff like that. And I'm going to post it in the class. But if you can make it, continue to make it. And we're going to continue to have a good semester. Let me just ask a different question for a second. Oh, by the way, my investment seminar, if you go to the announcement board in your class last week, or for Monday, you'll see that I'm doing an investment seminar in 23 minutes that you can come in, building your financial house. You're welcome to come. You're welcome to bring friends, family, whatever. It's all good, so please do. But in any case, oh, how's it going? How are your live classes? You're welcome, Bijou. How are your live classes, everybody? I made these not mandatory because I didn't want to interfere with your ability to go to live classes. How's that going? Anybody opt out? Anybody go? What are we looking at? All right. In that case, it's all good. I want to tell you all, I'll see you on the live stream in 2 weeks. You have a beautiful week. Enjoy the movies. I will post them up here shortly. And I appreciate you coming. It was really nice to see all 10 of you. I like the 2 likes. Continue to have your friends and family subscribe to, I know it does, Bijou. Subscribe to my channel. I can't even imagine, Andre. I can't even imagine how chaotic it is. This is enough for me to handle. I'm perfectly happy with where we are. Hey, Sharon, you refuse. Go ahead and opt out. I think you have a right to protect your health, right? But in any case, I'm glad I opted out. I said, let me go ahead and stay remote because I'm not trying to die over a class. I like you all and everything, but I'm not trying to die over this. Shoot, I'm trying to keep on kicking. I got things I got to do. You know what I'm saying? So anyhow, no, I won't, Richie. I'm going to take it smooth. I'm going back to see my children this week, so I may swing up to campus, Ashley, on Monday. There's some books I need to get, but in any case, I'll be kind of remote for a while. So just enjoy the movie next week, and we'll be using it in the exam, and we'll also use it to fuel some of our discussion. I don't want to have another written assignment until I start getting some of the grading done. So just relax and don't sweat the grades too much. I'll take care of you. The assignments aren't terribly difficult. Again, make sure that you watch the movie, How to Write a Small, right? 2, 3, 4 minutes, How to Write a Great Paper, because that's really what I'll be grading you on moving forward, and we're going to be good. So let me get off of here so I can get ready for the seminar, and then after that, got some things to do this evening, like get ready and pack and stuff like that. But you're great. Oh, okay. Ashley, if I come up there, I'll catch you. I'll see you then. All right, everybody. Well, thanks for joining me.